Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Joe Moeller. I am the co-host of Yuppies and Harpoons. With me is my good friend Jacob, and today we're going to be
Good evening.
covering. Well, I'm not sure how many topics we're going to be covering, but the big one we kind of want to go over and throw some darts at is Iran, the country of Iran, and kind of what they're doing in the region. They had some deals with Saudi that were negotiated with China, and obviously they had a big role in the attack that Hamas placed on Israel. And there's just a lot going on about Iran, but here in the immediate, something that happened today. Jim Jordan is the new guy that the GOP conference has chosen to try to run for speaker, and he has had
hmm
two uh, unsuccessful bids for winning the speakership, and it's really exposed a lot of the division in the GOP. And I was kind of wondering, Jacob, like, what were your thoughts on just kind of his performance and yeah, just where the speaker race might be going from here.
Yeah, I mean, the second vote that happened today had less support than it did in the first, so he's going backwards in support. Just in a short period of time, he was not able to rally support, which, as a speaker, leading, essentially one half the aisle, you really need to be able to do that and do it on with a lot of pressure and a lot at stake. So that's not good. That's not a strong way to start. If he continues this process, I don't see enough people coming together for him to be the speaker. Just based off who he is, his history, I think some people are willing to give him a benefit of the doubt. And then after today's second round, I think he's only going to lose support, which then kind of leads to the Democrats having a lot of control here and the Democrats winning. If Republicans can't find someone to back and support, then the Democrats will be able to either negotiate with a moderate and find a moderate that maybe they can win some Republican votes with, or there's a few other worst case scenarios as well. And this all is looming with a budget coming up and a government
Yeah,
shutdown.
this might be a place where we might have some disagreement because I think one of the worst case scenarios is Jim Jordan being the speaker, and
Yeah.
and so I certainly do not want him to succeed. I think it was just ridiculous what he and Scalise won the conference vote, and then a bunch of Jordan proponents basically held out, and Scalise drops out. Jim Jordan supposedly told Scalise that you get one ballot, and
hmm
and then just to see his blatant hypocrisy on his own ambitions to win. He's gonna try and run this
Yeah.
thing as many times as he can. But I think the fact that he lost votes is pretty damning, to say the least. I think he's a weak candidate. He hasn't done anything substantial. I mean, obviously he started the House Freedom Caucus, but he's also kind of riddled in scandals with his time
hmm
spent at Ohio State, and not reporting or not taking seriously sexual assault allegations against people associated with the wrestling team. And
Well, and
so,
and the worst part about no one being stepping up really, I guess, is why isn't there anyone to step in? That's the part that I'm really pushing for.
yeah.
Jim Jordan, he hasn't really shown he's a proven leader. He's shown that he can do Fox voice clips as needed when they have, testimony, and he says something that's just loud and obnoxious but has no substance to it. And that's, I mean, I think that's coming through pretty strong here too. It's kind of where what his abilities are is just being loud and saying crazy things.
Yeah, I think one of the I was talking to a friend of mine today who's he's a pretty liberal Democrat, and I was saying that I get sick of people in the center, whether you're center right or center left, not using your leverage as someone who is in the center and who can flip and work with centrist figures across the aisle. That leverage is never exercised. And here we had a far right maniac in Matt Gaetz who recalled the speakership And to me, I think that he partnered with Democrats to take out McCarthy. He and 8 radical Republicans. There just doesn't seem to be any thought about center right Republicans teaming up with Democrats and basically not letting Matt Gaetz get his scalp. And
Right.
obviously Gaetz took out McCarthy successfully, but the real success for Gaetz is going to be who replaces it, or his success will really be dependent on who the next speaker is. And if you wind up with someone like Patrick McHenry, that's not that's a
Right.
failure. That's a huge failure, and that seems to be where the momentum is heading. And I just think the whole thing is bizarre. And finally, after Jim Jordan had 2 unsuccessful ballots, it seems like centrist Republicans are starting to say, you know what, we're not going to cave on this. We're not going to go out and give the speakership to someone further to the right.
Right.
And reward the behavior that, in my opinion, Matt Gaetz shouldn't even be in the Republican conference. I think he should be thrown out for what he did. But I think centrist Republicans are beginning to realize that they have leverage, and they'd be perfectly fine with someone like Patrick McHenry, and they don't mind compromising and working with Democrats to be able to pull that across the finish line. And I think there's a whole lot of scenarios that could occur. I don't think Jordan's ever going to get the speakership, but I think that you could see.
I mean, I think there's a reason he didn't run 9 months ago, the first time this was an issue too. There was no support back then for Jordan. Yeah. So why 9 months later do we have support?
Right. No, I totally agree with that. But I mean, I think either McCarthy might come back and potentially get Democrat support, which I think would be I think that'd be really funny if he was able to pull that off. Or you could actually just see them expand the powers of the interim speaker and basically have that ride out till the 2024 elections and have Patrick McHenry be the interim speaker of the House, which if you're Matt Gaetz, it's like that. What a total flop, man. I mean,
And through this whole process, I tell you what, Hakeem Jeffries is really looking like a strong leader in winning the press. He knows how to handle the pressure, and he's been quiet until now. He's known when to speak and when to just let things play out. And really, I think at the end of the day, Hakeem Jeffries in a position to really gain a lot of authority in the House and on Capitol Hill, which he replaced Nancy Pelosi. There's a question whether he could fill those shoes, and so far he's on track. It looks that to be.
It's impressive. I mean, you got to give the guy some credit because he has command of that caucus, and I mean, from the far left to the center left, everybody supports him unquestionably, and it just shows you the stark difference in party unity between the Republicans and Democrats. I mean, it's just there's so much more we could say about that, but I think you want to work your way into talking about Iran?
Yeah. I think starting out with Iran. I mean, just a quick update on Israel and kind of Gaza, and some just thoughts around that this week. So this is October 18th recording this podcast, which is important as this is a day-to-day, plenty of updates and plenty going on there. So I think one of the main dominance takeaways of the past week is a couple different factors. One is just the media's role in this and the accountability with the media and providing truthful journalism and not jumping at every clickbait that they can get their hold of. And another factor too is the response for pro-Hamas sentiment around a lot of the Western world. So kind of separating even like pro-Palestine, but really people focusing on like pro-Hamas rhetoric, and it's been really shocking to me just to watch how open that this support has been for Hamas and sympathetic towards Hamas. You're seeing it on college campuses, and now a number of the universities are losing funding from supporters, and a kind of a ripple effect from that of supporting a group that did something in greater scale than what 9/11 would have been to the U.S. And within the week following, people are already showing support objectively for the terrorist group and not the civilians of Palestine, which I think is a major difference there. I don't know what thoughts you have around kind of some of the signs of support going around and so forth, Joe.
Yeah, I mean it's a there's no correct answer to give that anybody's going to like. You can say that you can say that Hamas is the worst thing on earth, and then you'll be thrown out into the garbage by 30% of the population here in the U.S. And then if you say that Hamas was justified in what it did, then probably 50 to 65% of the country's going to call you a terrorist. I mean, there's just my position is that hostile environments, radioactive environments produce hostile movements. And I
Yeah.
don't think that should be surprising to anybody. Now, the situations and the circumstances that cause those environments can be very, very complicated. And
Mm-hmm.
I get really, really tired of people on either side of the issue saying that the issue between Israel and Palestine isn't complicated. It is extremely complicated. And
Right. Correct.
Hamas is, as an organization, I have no time for. I think that
Yes.
they use Palestinian fear as a catalyst. I think that there's a lot of people on the left and people who are advocates of the Palestinian cause, if you will, who want to say that people who are in Hamas are well-intentioned soldiers who just want to fight for their people. And I remember seeing like videos of during the Ukraine war when there would be Russian soldiers, coming over who would be captured and they'd be crying. They're like, I don't even want to be here. He's just a good old Russian boy, and he's put in a Russian uniform fighting Putin's war and all that. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is a point to be made that the vices of a terrorist organization or any group like Hamas, there's a dramatic difference in the morality of the leadership and the people that they employ to accomplish their objectives. I think that there's a lot more. I think there's a lot of people who are probably in Hamas who, have had no meaning in their life, who have had the highest aspiration that they could ever attain in their circumstance in Gaza was to be mayor of an open air prison.
Right.
And so they have nothing to lose, but that's categorically different from the people who actually orchestrate what Hamas does, and
Mm-hmm.
that can't be questioned. So, that's my view of Hamas and what they've done. And they have
Mm-hmm.
put the people in Gaza into a situation. I've been thinking about this for like the past week nonstop. I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do if you're the Israelis. I don't know what you
Yes.
do if you're a person in Gaza. I can't even imagine what it would be like. I mean, if you go
Right.
on social media and you just listen to the missiles that are coming down. Imagine being there.
The
Where
constant
half of the
sirens
population.
screaming.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
1.1 million people migrating south to where another 1.2 million people live. The Israelis literally are turning off the water and turning off the electricity to get the people in northern Gaza to southern Gaza. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
and then people are being shot and they're being killed, while they're going to southern Gaza, and there's schools that are being bombed, mosques that are being bombed, and then if you presume the best about the Israelis, there's no way they're going to bat 1,000 on that. There's no way that they're always going to hit a target. There's and so you have what looks to be just atrocious acts of manslaughter, where churches and schools are being shot up, and innocent civilians are dying, and somebody may have miscalculated about whether or not there was like a Hamas headquarter base underneath the facility. I just can't imagine what it'd be like to be over there right now. I can't.
And a ground invasion, maybe they can pick out civilians versus the military, but right now that's not really possible. Just the uncertainty of what that would even look like. And meanwhile, Hamas has continued firing missiles there, and so Israel's really just what do you do? There's no option.
Well, and that's one of the problems that that makes Hamas, one of the worst things that Hamas does, that I think makes it just a deplorable organization, if you can even call it that, is that it's they don't wear uniforms. It's a violation of international law and the laws of war, where it's basically you can't camouflage tanks as ambulances. It's an atrocity.
And I think that's one of my concerns with media right now is kind of the willingness to jump to conclusions so quickly throughout this process. And the news of a hospital being hit by missiles yesterday from Israel, which then quickly led to Israel denying the facts, and then that leading to details coming out that it was really a rocket that Hamas had launched, failed, and landed in a parking lot, and it seems like not even close to 500 people were killed in that incident. But for most of yesterday morning, on Monday morning, it was the headlines were all breaking news: 500 killed in a missile strike on a hospital. And the reason I say that too is it's very easy to start building narratives, and there's so many moving parts because this is a war. We're not going to have accurate information. You saw this. There was early reports after October 7th that 40 babies were beheaded in a field, and that turned out to be incorrect, right? And that was passed around. I believe even Biden mentioned that, right? And what it ends up leading to.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was thinking the same thing, that like these not to interrupt, but like the 40 babies, the 40 beheaded babies narrative was something that the media jumped all over, and it was something that Israeli, that you would think would benefit the Israeli narrative, right? But then then the hospital gets bombed, and instantly the media says, "Oh, Israel did it," and here it was just. It turns out in both situations, like, the media was completely wrong. There were no beheaded babies, and Israel didn't bomb the hospital. It's just, I think we are in a information. We're having an information catastrophe right now. Not only, I mean, obviously, when you're dealing with war and what's reliable information, I mean, the same thing you saw happen with like Ukraine, where you had like this, like Brian Fitzpatrick, a U.S. rep from Pennsylvania, posting photos of like a magic Ukrainian jet who like shot down 7 Russian jets, and it's like, oh, okay, that was clearly bull. And so misinformation just circulates and is just saturated in war. But there's also the problem of deep fakes, and I don't know what we're going to do. Ben Shapiro put out and got into a bunch of controversy about showing pictures of a burnt baby that CNN took down because it was allegedly a deep fake photo, or I'm not sure how that works, or if it was a deep fake video. And I'm just kind of watching this all in real time, where you can honestly be in an age where deepfakes are starting to become a real thing, it's starting to look like people can rationally, within their own judgment, believe things that are just completely false on
Yes.
and be on both sides of the issue and feel entirely justified on it, because there's not hardly anything's reliable. And AI and especially with deep fakes, it's just I don't know how these social media platforms are supposed to respond to this. It's a nightmare.
It's going to be, and I think my worry with this is situation with like Iraq after 9/11, where you have really devastating event happen, and what ends up happening is you see an alienation of the humanity in Muslim Americans, or Muslims around the world, and the narrative is so strong, so pushed, and then you see we just completely dehumanize people, and then nothing ends up ever happening. Iraq was a failure in the sense of the objectives that we loosely had were never even achieved, and were really given up on. I think with this situation, with the 40 babies situation, it sounds like it's going to benefit Israel, but then it just feeds into the pro-Palestine movement of saying like, hey, see, they're fabricating information, when there were situations where babies were found beheaded, not to that
Yeah.
extent. And so that kind of got completely glossed over because this
Right.
one story made it fake. And then on the hospital side, with the hospital being bombed, it's it overshadows then the civilians that were killed by Israel and not by Hamas and their own people. And so then it just allows for the argument to be strengthened on both sides over false information, and just drives basically no solution, and resentment from everyone.
Yeah, no, I mean
So,
you're exactly right. I mean, there's so many problems that misinformation creates. I mean, look at if you look at the beheaded babies story, all of a sudden, people on the Palestinian side were saying, see, fake information. I'm like, last I checked, 1,400 Israelis still died.
right.
Okay,
Wait,
so
so why
no,
are we speaking about
yeah,
like, oh, we didn't do this horrific event,
atrocity,
but it's
not
like you
this thing,
still paratrooped on a dance EMD
yeah,
festival. Wait, like, come on.
right. And then and then you have the situation with the hospital and the school, and I mean, believe me, Israel has not just, even if Israel didn't bomb this hospital, it has bombed churches, it has definitely bombed schools,
Right.
and anybody who thinks that the Israelis are, I do know people on the Israeli side, they think that they are cautious and that they call houses and they say, get you this amount of time to evacuate and stuff like that. Um, I I don't think that we would. I, I don't think that that's a good metric necessarily to know if somebody is engaging ethically in war. Like, if the Russians were calling Ukrainian houses uh, and saying, "Hey, you have this much time to evacuate," and then proceeded to obliterate the buildings, I don't think the people in the West would be like, "Oh wow, look at these guys, real great fighters," real ethical use of their missiles. Like, I just don't I don't quite buy
Well,
into that.
and that also, I mean, the difficulty there and the difference there is you don't have Hamas actively trying to use civilians as shields too, and
Yeah,
that side
right.
of it. So
They
that's
do
where
wear
it complicates
uniforms,
it. Right? They
or
do have
Hamas does not
uniforms and
wear
they do
uniforms,
engage.
right? But
Yeah,
Ukrainians do wear uniforms. Yeah,
and so they're playing by a different rule book. So that even adds, if Russia was doing it, I think people would be upset, but there at least be a playbook that they're playing by that is agreed
yeah.
upon. I think that's part of the
Well,
challenge here. Hmm.
and one of the things people need to realize, about the hospital is that it is, if you Google the hospital, it's been known for a long time that it's underneath the hospital are Hamas coordinates there. They have meeting places. They have, I wouldn't know if you call it headquarters, but there are certainly facilities underneath the hospital that Israeli intelligence knows are there. And so, the
I
fact that
believe
the
Hamas has
hospital,
publicly said, right? Hamas has even said
yes,
themselves. Like it's that's the thing that kills me is so many people Hamas publicly states the information and then it's in question. But then that can be challenged there too.
yeah. Well, but it should be noted that if Israel actually, and it's hard, this is horrible to say. Anybody who's listening, I'm not I'm not trying to justify the action. I'm trying to explain the international law here. If
Right.
Israel were to hit a hospital because it believed that there was a terrorist organization underneath the hospital, it doesn't violate international law. It doesn't violate the laws of war. Because what you can't do in a war crime is when you purposely target civilians. But if you target, terrorists, people like Hamas, and civilians are killed as a result of the strike, that's not a war crime. And Hamas, but Hamas wants, and I believe this, the leaders of Hamas are willing to sacrifice the lives of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of Palestinians, in order to, well, we can get into this,
Yeah.
create more instability, which is precisely what countries like Iran want. And it's an absolute mess.
And it makes the story believable too, because we know Hamas has this base underneath the hospital. We know it'd be a target, military target. We see a headline saying the hospital is destroyed by Israel, rocket. It's instantly, well, that makes sense. Why would Israel let that many civilians die too? And it allows the story to go on. Which part of that instability, again, like what you're just leading to, is Iran then, and how much they orchestrate instability throughout this whole region and really trying to press that around the world, and driving a lot of blame can go towards Iran and willingness to support these terrorist groups and different uprisings around the Middle East, and try to play chess with a lot of these countries and instability.
Yeah, it's tough because I was talking to some people who are on the Palestinian side, and they were wondering why in the world the U.S. was putting aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean Sea. They're like, do you think Gaza needs more planes above it? Do the Israelis not have enough? And what I said to him is that this is geopolitics. This isn't just about an issue between Hamas and Israel. This is an issue about the region, and about who perpetuated Hamas, who funded Hamas, and there's a joke that goes around quite commonly about if you mess with Israel, you're about to find out why the Americans don't have free healthcare. And it's this, it's obviously these fleets that sit on top of these aircraft carriers, and we've put two of them now outside of inside the Mediterranean Sea, and so why are they there? Part of the reason, the main reason that they're there is because they do not want, the U.S. is not interested in having Hezbollah, which is basically a terrorist military arm of Iran that operates in Lebanon. And those who aren't familiar with the borders surrounding Israel, Lebanon is directly north. Syria is kind of in like the northeast side, and then you have Jordan on the eastern side, and Egypt in the southern region, and then Gaza is in the southernmost part of Israel that is also along the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. So that's kind of the the surroundings for Israel. And so
In
Israel,
Israel,
because
Israel's the
of
size
Gaza.
of New
Hold on, just give me
Jersey.
1 second.
Yeah, yeah.
Or,
Just for context,
yeah,
Israel is about the size of New
Israel
Jersey,
is the
so
size
all
of New
those
Jersey.
countries are around that small.
Right. And so it's going to take a serious amount of manpower to do a land invasion in Gaza, right? And Gaza is in the south, so Israel's been reallocating a lot of its troops to potentially the south, but they're concerned about Hezbollah launching rockets in from Lebanon, which threatens to cities like Haifa, which is in northern Israel, and areas like the Golan Heights. And so, which I believe were annexed and recognized by the Trump administration. So there's concern that Iran is going to, through Hezbollah, basically put pressure on northern Israel, while Israel is preoccupied with things that are going on in the south. And the other thing that that the U.S. is trying to do is it doesn't want normalization discussions between Saudi Arabia and Israel to fall through. This is really important.
Yes.
Part of the agreement that the U.S. has with Israel is, obviously we're going to come to your defense if there's an existential crisis for your country. If part of the normalization agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia, opening their borders, letting their citizens visit each other, and vice versa, having bilateral trade, is that the Saudis would be put into the American security family. In other words, if Iran were to try to threaten Saudi Arabia for some reason, the same amount of protection that the U.S. is showing Israel by putting 2 aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean would be found sitting outside of Saudi Arabia. And so the U.S. wants to demonstrate to Saudi Arabia the benefit of American security, military security. And so obviously there's other factors at play here as well, but I think those are the 2 driving and most relevant things to be aware of.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's really well said. And Saudi Arabia's role in this whole thing is pretty crucial. The 2 countries, Iran and Saudi Arabia, have had tensions going back decades now, and even further back there, but really since the Iranian Revolution. And part of that has been because of the U.S. favoring Saudi Arabia during this time period. And over the last several years, Saudi Arabia has really been making a lot of grounds with the U.S. through, mainly investment through the sovereign wealth fund, but some other pretty large areas as well. Just geopolitically, the Saudi Arabia has helped the U.S. and shown support towards the U.S. Some of that I feel like has been under question under the Biden administration, and their I would say temperature towards trusting Biden. So kind of famously, the first time Biden met with the Crown Prince, they didn't shake hands, and that some of that was around Jamal Khashoggi's, assassination, and Biden wanting to show strength around free speech and the right and wrong. But I think the latest movements and Biden's response in this situation here, this war, I think has really shown some of that benefits that Saudi Arabia originally expected and would want from the U.S.
Yeah. Well, and there's also this. If we're going to talk about Iran, we have to talk about Israel. You just can't. And we've talked about Israel a lot already, but I think to depending on what you think of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, his legacy prior to this invasion from Hamas was the Abraham Accords. And for those who aren't familiar with what the Abraham Accords are, they're basically normalization agreements that Israel was able to reach with surrounding Arab countries like Bahrain, like the United Arab Emirates, like Morocco. I think there's another one in there. but there were 4 countries that were able to sign on during the Trump administration, and the Saudis were very influential in basically making those happen. Basically, none of those countries would have normalized relations with Israel without the implicit permission of Saudi Arabia. Now, the reason that the reason that Israel was seeking to do this is because they basically wanted to leverage their technological innovation and against Iran. And so their strategy was we're going to normalize relations with the rest of the Arab world and basically have the Arab world surround Iran. And so Iran has been trying to counteract that and do everything it can to basically stop what Israel's been trying to do. And so you saw that the UAE actually had a normalization with Iran at the same time that it signed into an agreement between itself and Israel, and more recently the Saudi Arabia, which in a deal negotiated by China, was able to reach an agreement with Iran. And so Iran has realized this, and it's part of the reason that they funded Hamas. Iran feels so strongly about Israel not normalizing trade and relations with Saudi Arabia, that it's willing to basically fund a domestic terrorist group within Gaza to basically usurp that, and it's caused a lot of havoc. The Secretary Blinken has said that talks have not ceased, but they're at least uncertain, and for the time being, between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and so
right. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Right now is not the time to be having these conversations, between the two countries. Israel has its priority, and why would they be focusing on negotiating at this point in time until they kind of have a better grasp of what they're dealing with on their own soil so far. So once we kind of get a better idea of what's taking place on the grounds, and the different, Israel has a better understanding, I think it'll be interesting to see if there's quickly resume, or if Saudi Arabia will want to wait until this seems to be completely settled.
Well, and part of the reason that these Arab countries have began normalizing relations with Israel, it wasn't just about their technology. Israel, to its credit, led the fight against the Iran nuclear deal, and so it was not any. It wasn't like the Crown Prince coming over to Congress to challenge a sitting U.S. president and about going forward with the Iran nuclear deal. It was Benjamin Netanyahu who came over and challenged the U.S. president in Congress. I mean, it was unprecedented what Benjamin Netanyahu did. Because
what's at stake is billions and billions of dollars of aid that we provide to Israel too, by potentially challenging the U.S. like that. There's some pretty high stakes
on its home dirt.
Its home turf.
And what that did was it told other Arab countries that were fearful of Iran that the leader on this issue, the number one proponent in our region who opposes Iran getting a hold of a nuclear weapon, is Israel. And as much as we don't like Israel, they are closer to anybody to the Americans, and they would be a vital ally. And then the Americans see that and like, oh, so you think Israel's important? Yeah, it is important. And if you normalize relations with them, and so that we can set up a wide-ranging security apparatus, we're going to give you security. We're going to provide military protection over you in case Iran, invades.
And his concerns, Netanyahu's concerns, was some of it was providing legitimacy to the Iran regime and saying like, these are not people to make deals with, and the whole idea was that they would not be able to enrich uranium. They would not be able to create and develop any hard water systems, all used in nuclear warfare. And the reality of it, and the concerns of it, was that this was not a fully hashed out plan. This had a 10-year time frame, and then it would sunset. And so some of the feedback there was the sanctions would be lifted. These sanctions were pretty crippling to just Iran's total economy. Their oil exports were cut nearly over in half by the sanctions. And so by lifting these sanctions, it allows for, during this 10-year span, Iran to build up funds and ability to mobilize. And then at the end, then the negotiating table is going to be significantly different when you have a strong Iran versus one that's been crippled. The homeland, the people are protesting, and then Netanyahu's whole concern around that is saying, you're propping up this country that is actively funding terrorist groups and cells that are looking to, one, get rid of Israel and the state of Israel, and two, then cause further instability in the Middle East and possibly a World War III. So those are some of the concerns there, and so forth.
Yeah, and it kind of creates this weird problem, right? Where when you talk about a country getting a nuclear weapon, you people will say, why shouldn't Iran have a right to be able to get its own nuclear weapon? Well, because the more countries that have a nuclear weapon, the more leaders in the world there are that could press a button. That's why. And yes, of course, us here in the U.S., we have the added benefit of being someone who can press a button, and we can press a lot of buttons. But part of I guess, the agreement that the Americans try to make with countries is that, look, we will open up your economy, we will give you tons of money, and if somebody, we have our military has nukes, and if anybody threatens to obliterate you, we'll obliterate them. And so countries have been like, get rich and depend on a country that, they're kind of dependable. They're okay. I mean, a lot of countries take that bargain. Iran did not. Iran was like, you guys toppled our government. Screw you. We'll take the sanctions happily, and so that we can, go and create our own, basically our own self-defense and have our own nuclear weapons, and we're willing to pay the consequences. I don't necessarily think that that's what the Iranian people want, but it's clearly what the administration in Tehran's interested in.
Right. And the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, he's one of the longest serving leaders in the Middle East. He took over, I believe it was in the 80s. Prior to that, was in leadership in the Irani government from the revolution. Prior to that, he was in jail due to being opposition of the party before the revolution. And this is an individual who has assassinated people all around the world and has really done some pretty horrendous, things against humans, crimes against humanity, and there's just a lot of different ways of legitimizing him by having this Iran deal that Netanyahu was concerned about, of saying we're propping up this individual who has a proven track record of not playing by the same rules that we're entering into other countries who are playing by another set of rules.
Yeah. So. Listen, I agree. I think that the leader in Iran is terrible. I would also say that there's probably some officials in the Pentagon that are equally deplorable. But
sure. You want to play now? Play the both sides, yeah.
But I would not say that there's more equivalence between the U.S. and Iran. That is not what I'm saying. But when it comes to I don't know. I always tread carefully whenever I hear somebody say that the guy assassinated people, and I mean we assassinated Soleimani. I mean we
Right.
took out their second their second in command. I mean, and you can say he was a terrible man. Well, at the time he was also negotiating with Saudi Arabia, and the
Mhm.
U.S. did not want to see peace between or normalization occur between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and so there's speculation. It's not confirmed, obviously, but there's speculation that actually what happened was U.S. intelligence found out that there were negotiations, and that Soleimani was actually leading those negotiations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and took them out.
Are those verified then, or
No, they're not fair. They're
okay?
speculative.
Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what's nice, right? Is that if you are a deplorable human being like Soleimani, then it's always appropriate to take him out, and you can take
Mhm.
him out when it's the most convenient for for you. And so, um, but I just felt the need to throw that in there. Um, but it is interesting how I did want to know what your thoughts were on China kind of working its way in being that that negotiator. I think they get about 30% of their oil from the Gulf, and so they've kind of become tensions between. My understanding is that Iran and Saudi Arabia export oil, and China seems to get has does a lot of commerce with both countries, and for them to be at odds is actually something that China doesn't want to see happen for its own interests.
Mhm. Well, and China's has a pretty ambitious vision for what they want for their country. Um, I would be I would be surprised to see them get involved too much here. I think this is a good distraction for China there to wait, kind of remain quiet and then pivot and find a way to come out on top. Maybe afterwards stepping in and providing substantial aid and infrastructure for one side that you can see a clear benefit of supporting. I think they're going to kind of remain a little quiet during this time period, if I had to kind of guess, and then try to step in as a hero at some point when timing is perfect.
No, it's
And
just
so, yeah.
it is interesting. Yeah, it is interesting that they're kind of they did stick their head in in the middle of the Israeli uh, war with Hamas, with Israel's war with Hamas, that, by
Mhm.
saying that Israel's acting beyond what's needed for self-defense. I thought that, you know, as if China has any room to speak on human rights, um, but where the U.S. is actually having regional pressures. Yeah, we have pressures in the Ukraine, we have pressures in Israel, and obviously we have pressures in Taiwan. And you know, there's only one military in the world that could actually keep all this stuff at bay, and that's the American military. But right now, I think there's a real undercurrent in U.S. politics that just says, why is this any of our problem? Like, why does any of this bother or concern us? And I think other countries sense that. I think they sense that the support for Ukraine is waning, that
Mhm.
the American commitment to defending other democracies has a cap, and they're willing to test it. They're willing to test it. Now with Israel, I don't think that alliance is ever going to go anywhere. I think that you know they are too indispensable of an ally when it comes to just receiving intelligence on the Middle East region.
Yeah.
I don't think that'll ever go away. But what I think China and Russia are hoping is that if the U.S. is distracted and putting all its time and effort into um, protecting Israel, that the political pressure to protect Taiwan and the Ukraine will be minuscule.
Right. Right. And I think the budget negotiations that are happening in Washington, I think China and many of these countries are keeping a very close eye. Israel, I believe, asked for 10 billion today in funding, and what is the rhetoric around that going to be? Is there support for 10 billion, or is maybe that we can only get the votes for 5 billion? And what message does that send to around the world? Um, how strong then is the U.S. military? Even if we have the strongest military, how strong are the people of the military? And another factor is we have the best technology, but we don't have a big reserves. We don't have the numbers of individuals here, and so a long drawn out war is going to be very costly. So how does that all factor in the game of chess here? Other countries are sitting back and watching and trying to figure out where they fit into all this.
It's going to be interesting what Iran chooses to do. Especially if they try to draw some red lines to talk tough to Israel. If you keep going forward with what you're doing in Gaza, there's going to be repercussions to pay. But Iran knows that the moment they invade northern Israel, their leadership is dead. Their government's
Right.
dead. There's just, and that's what those aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean represent. That is your death waiting for you. I just
And
don't
they
know how
know that.
calculated.
Mhm.
Right, right, and so I don't know how, if something were to break out, if a war was to break out with Hezbollah in northern Israel, and it became stretched. Recently, I think as much as like 7 months ago, the U.S. conducted a military exercise with Israel that was it involved like the most um, there's a word I'm looking for. It was the most sophisticated but also collaborative military exercise that had ever been conducted between the two countries.
Okay.
And it demonstrated to the world just how interconnected the U.S. and Israeli militaries are. And so,
Hmm.
if you try to do anything, if you're Iran, you're just yeah. And again, this is what the U.S. is trying to convey to the other countries is that um, if you normalize with Israel, you normalize with us. And so it creates an interesting geopolitical landscape.
Yeah. Well, and Iran knows that our military strength is basically saying the leadership's going to be dead if they try to do anything, and that's why they use these proxy groups. They use Hamas and Hezbollah, and
Right.
they don't fight directly. They fight indirectly. They prop up other groups. They provide drones to these countries. They provide missiles. They provide guns and ammo and training and financing and you know the list is endless of what they can provide, except for humanitarian aid to the civilians. And that's how they funnel it. That's the whole thing. Is like they can provide everything except for humanitarian aid.
What a great point. That's
And
so true. It's like 6 billion goes missing. Oh, what do you know? Rockets, infrastructure? No, no
no,
infrastructure in
right?
Gaza. Never, right?
Because the reality is the EU provided
They're
pipes
such
for
assholes.
water and sewer systems in Hamas, and you have videos of Hamas tearing them out of the ground and making pipe bombs out of them. And Iran knows this, and they're funneling further supplies to make that a reality. And partnering with the aid these countries and different groups are getting from around the world, that is humanitarian aid, and then they say, well, what did that aid provide that you can make for militarization, and we'll backfill. Um, in the early days after October 7th, Israel bombed two different airports, and it was caused with a lot of controversy. And part of the reason for that was Iranian planes flying to those locations. One that was presumed to have, it was a cargo plane and presumed to have either weapons or some kind of supply. Otherwise, why would you be sending a plane to that area? The other had some leaders as well, and so they're providing direct support. And it the reports coming, the Wall Street Journal broke the news early on that Iran would have had to give the green light for the invasion on October 7th of Israel. They are not acting alone, and it's a little fuzzy of how everything in the full level of support is not clear, but it's not fuzzy whatsoever. It is abundantly clear that there is direct support happening there.
Hamas said so. They said it.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. I mean,
Hamas says
they said as much. It's not a secret. And I would make this point. If you are questioning about whether or not Hamas is a terrorist organization, again, I know that people that I know would say that the individual fighters in Hamas who've had no meaning in their lives, that's a separate category. I'm talking about the leadership in Hamas, people who orchestrated this attack. Right. They collaborated with the Iranians. I mean, like, they're the greatest exporter of terrorism in the world. I mean, this is just not anyway.
Just the understanding of how to get through the fence along the Gaza border. It is the most highly sophisticated fence in the world. It goes down tens of feet, several feet thick of concrete. They say, if a cat tries to get through, the Israeli forces would know. But, a large-scale invasion happens like this. It does not happen with multiple collaboration of power and different resources. And it's clear. And I think the U.S. has been very hesitant to speak about this in the wake of recent news. Biden administration has not want to really recognize Iran's role in all of this, partly because of the negotiation with the prisoner swaps, where 6 individuals from each side, 6 prisoners the U.S. had, were exchanged for 6 prisoners Iran had, along with $6 billion in funds that we gave. So it wasn't a 1-for-1 swap. It was a 1-for-1 plus $1 billion per person. And, the Biden administration has been trying to rekindle the Obama years negotiations, and doing so has provided a long leash for Iran to benefit through it all, with the U.S. having no benefit at all through it so far. And now you're stuck in a situation where Biden's either going to have to backtrack or just completely finagle in a Cold War way with Iran. And meanwhile, I think Biden deserves a ton of credit through this whole process. He has shown tremendous leadership around the world. He has said some very strong and bold statements. He has not minced words. He has basically not done everything he has done up until this point in his presidency. He's really trying to show the U.S.'s force here, which has been really, I think, honorable and has allowed for a lot less escalations in the
I'm going to send you some Biden paraphernalia. Biden boy.
And boy, give credit where credit deserves. That's all. I'll pull out my laundry list of criticisms. We can go over those as well. But but we'll give him this one. And he's up against the Democratic Party is kind of torn on this subject, and I think he is saying, where is America's interest in all this, and how do we prevent a global war? I think a lot of other folks that are coming at this are looking at it as an isolated incident. And I think Biden has really been able to look at this as where's America's role in this? It's not Israel and Palestine exclusively, and also what else could happen from this, and I think he's really been able to navigate that well.
That's that's a really good point. Actually, I think it's one we can probably wrap up on, which is that it the it would be way worse if we didn't have aircraft carriers in the Mediterranean, and then Iran invaded Israel. You know, I mean,
Right.
if Iran, now when I say Iran invades Israel, I'm talking obviously through Hezbollah or something. Um, if that happens, no matter how swift and destructive the U.S. military is, stopping something that's already started is much more difficult than just preventing it to begin with. And
Correct.
the last thing we need to be doing, especially if we want to protect Taiwan, is to be passing funding bills to fund the Ukrainians and fight a war against Iran and Israel, or in Lebanon or wherever it would take place, or and then also try to deter China from invading Taiwan. I mean that's just you're starting to spread yourself out way too much, and I think that's a really apt point, which is that Biden may not actually even be that pro-Israel. His party's certainly not there, but he sees the geopolitical significance of this. That if a war breaks out, now you're going to have Russia invading the country, you're going to have Iran invading the country. It's next up is China, and who's going to stop these countries from violating sovereignty, of other countries? And we're I guess the world policeman, and he realizes that the best job that a policeman can do is go to the place before the crime is committed, so it doesn't happen. And I think that's a solid point.
Yeah, and I think that's a point that's kind of redundant at this point. It's like, haven't we said this a million times? But I think there's a reason. It's because it's the effective method, and I think that, like you said, that's a great kind of point to end on.
Yeah,
and so forth. So
well, I think that does it for this episode of Yuppies and Harpoons. If you enjoyed listening to this, you found this very, very offensive, please don't ever listen to us again. Don't leave a review. Don't leave anything. We don't really
no
care.
comment. I want to hear it. I want to hear it. Let's bring it on.
Send me an email. Yeah. No, but like, subscribe, share, all that stuff is very, very helpful. But once again, we plan to be here next week. There was a little bit of a scheduling mishap on my part, so sorry.
Someone
for the
had some
podcast,
midterms.
folks. I did. I had law school midterms, and you can tell by the hair it needs cut. I'm in a hoodie. It's not good. So, next week I'll be much more presentable, and you can lose the Under Armour hat, Jacob. I'll see ya.